Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of William Taft, and the focus is lofty expectations. And there were lofty expectations for Taft from the very beginning when his parents, Judge Alphonso Taft and Louisa Taft, brought him into the world September 15th, 1857. And it was just a couple of months later that his mother said he is very large of his age and grows fat every day. Spreads his hands to anyone who will take him, and his face is wreathed with smiles at the slightest provocation. And these, frankly, were characteristics of Taft throughout most of his life. The big smile, willing to have a helping hand to just about anybody, and he was also a very large boy that became a very large man. Well, his parents did have those high expectations, and they pushed their children. Louisa herself was highly educated. She was pretty independent, and again, she was a force to be reckoned with in the household of do your studies, work hard. Judge Taft was similar, but he had a little bit of a softer side, which came through in William as well. But he and his son really bonded around one major thing, and that was the law. The highest goal in life, according to Alphonso Taft, was to be Chief Justice of the United States, is more than to be president in my estimation. This was something that William Taft took to heart, and little did his father know that his son would be the only person in American history to hold both of those jobs, president and Chief Justice. Now, Taft was only 4 years old when the Civil War broke out, but really was kind of little impact on the Taft family. They're living in Cincinnati, Ohio at the time. Taft going to school, normal activities, outdoor activities, played a lot of baseball, wrestling, and swimming. Went to Woodward High School, enrolled at the age of 13. Now, this was a no-nonsense school. There were no extracurricular activities in the entire school. You were there to learn, you were there to study. But Taft was popular, not only because he was a good student, because he had this genial personality. Again, the big smile, the big laugh, friendly, outgoing. He did well in the classroom, finished second in his class. He gave an address at the commencement ceremony on women's suffrage. This was almost 50 years before women would get the constitutional right to vote. He was talking about it in 1874. Well, again, the one thing that Taft was enamored with throughout his youth, throughout his life, was the law. And a lot of it had to do with his father. He loved to visit his courtroom at the Ohio Superior Court. His father would come home in the evenings while Taft was doing his homework. They would talk about his cases. He would share with him the history and traditions of the law, and Taft wanted to follow in his father's footsteps. So, graduated from high school, what did that mean? It meant Yale. Alphonso Taft had gone to Yale, Taft's older brothers had gone to Yale, William Taft wanted to go to Yale, and sure enough he did. At the age of 17, all 6 foot, 225 pounds of him certainly stood out in the crowd, and he stood out at Yale. Personality, activities, again, he was involved as a wrestler and as a rower, but no team sports. His father was pretty clear on this point. That's too much time. You're there to study, you're there to learn, you're there to do well in the classroom, and sure enough, he did. But in the meantime, his father was doing well in the world, got a chance to move up. This was the period of Ulysses Grant's second term as president. There were a bunch of scandals, a lot of turnover in the cabinet. That created openings, and Alphonso Taft got his shot. Secretary of War, he only lasted in that job 3 months because of some more turmoil in the cabinet. Grant moved him over to become Attorney General, so 2 cabinet positions in just a few months. In the meantime, Will Taft is getting ready to graduate from Yale as a senior. He was invited into the Skull and Bones Society, the secretive club, very prestigious. But again, that's a side point. His job was to finish at the top of his class, and he finished just short. Couple of points behind one of his friends, finished number 2 in his class, gave an interesting address called The Professional and Political Prospects of the College Graduate during the commencement ceremonies. Now, Taft had a decision to make. Not a career, that was already decided. He was going to go into the law, but how would he get there? Would he read the law? Would he go to law school? Where would he go? Well, as he would say later, I love Yale as I love my mother. His father had gone to Yale Law School, why wouldn't he? Well, he did not. Came back home, went to the University of Cincinnati Law School. He was closer to home. They had an interesting sort of curriculum where he and his 60 other students would study and go to class, but they would also have to work. They would get practical experience in a law firm in town, and for Taft, that was actually his father's old firm. So this was all working out pretty well. And Taft even had another thing going on, another activity where he became a newspaper reporter. He had a stint at the Cincinnati Commercial where he was covering the court beat. He was actually pretty good at it. They offered him a full-time job after a while, but he'd have to give up the law. No way, said Taft. this is a fun thing on the side. I'm going to be a lawyer. The one thing that his father continued to push him on, again, stay serious about your profession. Too much socializing, too much dating, you're wasting your time, as he rebuked his 22-year-old son. I do not think you have accomplished this past year as much as you ought. Our anxiety for your success is very great, and I know that there is but one way to attain it, and that is by self-denial and enthusiastic hard work in the profession. This gratifying your fondness for society is fruitless. But this was the personality of William Taft. He tried to balance the best he could, but for Taft, that was mainly just him trying to do it all. Well, 1880 rolls around, some changes for Taft. He graduates from law school, passes the bar, and gets involved in politics for the first time. Republican tradition in the family. It's 1880s, an election year. James Garfield is running as the Republican, and Taft gets out there in the campaign trail a little bit, and he stumps for Garfield. He also picks up his first political appointment as the assistant prosecutor of Hamilton County. This is going to get him in the courtroom all the time, great experience, and great relationships and connections within the party, which would soon pay off. Now, Garfield is elected president, but he's assassinated after just a couple of months. Chester Arthur takes over, and Arthur invites Alphonso Taft to Washington. Gives him a job, an opportunity to go overseas as the minister to Austria-Hungary, and he says, oh, by the way, I've got another job, perhaps for your son, if he might be interested. In Cincinnati, we've got an opening for the collector of the internal revenue of the 1st District. And sure enough, Will Taft was interested. He signed on. This is a major step up in the political appointment world, and he loathed this job. It was pure drudgery. All day at his desks with forms and numbers and this whole political patronage system where you were expected to fire people or hire people, not based on competence, but actually based on political connections. And Taft just wasn't all that interested in this job. He didn't stay very long. He was happy to go back to being a lawyer. Besides, he was preoccupied with something else. A young lady by the name of Helen Herron. Everybody called her Nellie. And Nellie Herron, highly educated, went to the Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, incredibly well-rounded. She liked music and reading and literature and philosophy, and she had lofty goals for herself as well. Now, the Herrons had been friends, family friends, with the Hayeses, Rutherford and Lucy Hayes. And when Rutherford Hayes had been president in the White House, they invited the Herrons to actually join them for a short visit. This was back in 1877. Nellie Herron went, and she was enamored with the place. She made it up her mind at that time that she was going to marry a man who was destined to be president and that she would become First Lady. And this was not a passive or passing idea for her. She would actually pursue this quite consciously throughout her life. Now, Nellie Herron and a few friends put together what they called a salon after the French, where they would get together with friends once a week and have intellectual discussions across many topics. Will Taft was one of those who was invited to join in, and they got a lot closer. And Taft was the more aggressive one in trying to make the match, eventually proposing marriage in April of 1885. She gave a tentative yes, but still was waiting a little bit before the final push, and then she said okay. They got married the following year in her parents' home, off to a honeymoon in Europe. They had a great time, museums and sightseeing and shopping, came back, settled in the suburbs of Cincinnati, and he was back to being a lawyer. Now, Taft didn't stay in a job very long. He had a lot of jobs in his life, but usually something better was always coming along to get him to jump to something else. And that's what happened just about a year into this marriage. Taft is only 29 years old. He's only 7 years out of law school, and he was offered the job to be a judge on the Ohio Superior Court, just like his father had been. And he's all excited, comes home to tell his wife about the news, and she says, look, don't try to be funny. That's perfectly impossible. Just feeling he's too young and inexperienced for such a thing. But this is a very real offer. Judge Judson Harmon was stepping down from the bench in the middle of his term. That gave the governor, Joseph Foraker, the opportunity to name his replacement for the balance of that term, and he selected Will Taft. Taft was thrilled, a chance to be a judge. This is something he always wanted to do. There was one person, though, who wasn't all that happy, and that was his bride. Nellie Taft said, it was not a matter of such warm congratulation after all. I dreaded to see him settled for good in the judiciary and missing all the youthful enthusiasms and exhilarating difficulties which a more general contact with the world would have given him. She thought the judiciary, even this judge position at such a young age, was a dead end. She wanted her husband to be president of the United States, but he wasn't about to pass this up. took on the job and was only in this position for a couple of years, again, before something else came along. Well, a lot of the cases he had to deal with were between management and labor, and we'll give you one example. The case of Moores and Company versus Bricklayers Union Number 1. In this case, the bricklayers were actually in a dispute with a company called Parker Brothers. Now, the union, though, pressured to try to put pressure on Parker Brothers, decided to go after some of their suppliers, and that's where Moores and Company, a limestone supplier, actually came into the picture. Well, Moore said, look, I didn't do anything to you guys. You can't strike against me, and they sued. And this ended up going in front of Judge Taft, and Judge Taft agreed with the company of Moores. And this was a pattern for him as he saw these what he called secondary strikes, where the company being struck wasn't really a party to the actual dispute. Taft saw these as boycotts, not strikes, and he saw them as illegal. In his decision, he ruled that under common law, there are losses willfully caused to one by another in the exercise of what otherwise would be a lawful right from simple motives of malice that made it illegal. He issued an injunction against the strikers in this case, and he would get a reputation for those injunctions, but those are stories for another day. That is William Taft and Lofty Expectations from the life of William Taft. For more presidential chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.